The .NET Core podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .NETCore.show/patrons. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, the only podcast which is devoted to .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, EF Core, Signal R, and not forgetting the .NET Core community itself. I am your host, Jamie Gaprogman-Taylor, and this is episode 37, Rebus with Mogens Heller Grabe. In this episode I interviewed Mogens about Rebus and how it can help adding asynchrony into your applications. Some of you may know Mogens from his work on Rebus, his blog, or his brewing company, the Alley Brew Company. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So thank you very much, Mogens, for being on the... sorry, let me start that again. I got it wrong straight away, didn't I?
No, it was good. It's okay. Mogens.
Okay. Fair enough. I might leave this bit in.
Yeah, sure.
So yes, thank you ever so much, Mogens, for being on the podcast. I appreciate it. You're a very busy person. I mean, we'll come on to just how many things you're currently doing in a moment. But I thought, just for the people who are listening in who may not know about you or the work that you do, I was wondering, could you give us a sort of brief introduction?
An introduction of the work that I do?
Yeah, sort of like an introduction to you and sort of the work that you do, that kind of thing.
Yeah, my name is Mogens, and I'm working as a programmer. I've been doing that for 13 years now, I think. And the last 3 years, I've been self-employed, basically trying to build a company around an open source service bus that I made. For people who might be familiar with for example, in-service bus or mass transit, then that's the kind of service bus that I made. Mine is called the Rebus. In addition to that, I brew beer, and I actually have registered a company to do that. But it's kind of on a hobby basis still. So it's going really, really slowly with getting anywhere with the beer thing. Yeah, so I guess that's the work that I do.
Cool, excellent. So yeah, you just said that you brew your own beer and you've registered your own brewing company.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Are you just a big fan of beer, or?
Yeah, I can't deny that. I'm really interested in beer, and I used to work with a guy who was a brewer too, and he introduced me to brewing, and he made me sign up for a short series of lectures that would introduce you to beer chemistry. There's a lot of chemistry involved, and it really I suddenly could see a use for all of the chemistry lessons that I had in secondary school. So suddenly all of these things could be put to use, and it all made sense. And the end result is beer. So what's not to like about that? So it basically I just went on from there. But I had kind of a rough start with my brewing career, because I basically learned too much too fast. So I just constantly pushed actually starting brewing because I could not just buy a starter kit because I knew that then this and this would be wrong. And so I basically started out buying everything. So I had to buy all kind of measurement devices for measuring sugar concentration in the wort, and pH meter, and basically all of the stuff that you need to brew really good beer. And then I just sort of dove into trying to make use of that, and I'm still learning. So I don't think I can brew really good beer yet, but I also think I'm being pretty critical of my own results, because people actually like the beer that I brew.
I see. So maybe what we can do is we can get everyone who listens to the show who's interested in beer to place an order.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, that would be cool. But unfortunately, I cannot sell the beer that I produce right now because I'm not approved for, selling foodstuffs. You have to produce your foodstuffs in an approved facility to do that. So my plan is to, at some point when I have a recipe that I really believe in, then I can rent myself into a professional facility and then, rent a facility and produce a batch and maybe end up with a couple of 100 liters of really good beer. And then I can try and sell that.
This sounds really good. So is this going to be a side project alongside of Rebus, or is this a retirement plan?
It is a side project. It's very much a side project, and I don't spend that much time doing it. But I don't know. Let's see. Maybe it's a retirement plan. I don't know.
I like that. I do know that there are a number of developers that I spend a lot of time talking with about our side projects, for learning new techniques and new tools and new frameworks and sometimes new languages. But I don't think I've met many developers who take their side projects outside of development, which is, I think it can be quite good because you're applying the same sort of design methodologies, and stuff, but it's taking it to a different direction so that you can improve in that area. So one of the things that I do is I sometimes play bass guitar, and obviously I take an agile-like technique to learning songs and learning pieces and learning music, in that I don't have to worry about all of the minutiae of what I'm doing. Just get the basic form right, and then I'll go back and improve upon that. Revisit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You are absolutely right, and I think it is brewing beer. A lot of it is craftsmanship, and it's in the hands. But also a lot of it is being able to reflect over your results and having an engineering approach to it, where you somehow systematically focus on an area, and then you change a variable, and then you evaluate your output, basically. So a lot of it is also engineering, at least in my head.
So do you have a name for the brew that you're brewing yet, or is that still a trade secret?
My company is called The Alley Beer Company, and that's because my office is in a shared office space that is called Alley 87. So I basically just took my name after our office space here.
So you've stolen the name because naming things is hard, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier on about Rebus, and you said it's a little bit like a service bus.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit about Rebus and what it's aiming to solve, and maybe a little bit about what a service bus is?
Yeah, sure. Well, when people say service bus, people have very different, perceptions of what a service bus does and should do. This type of service bus is what ThoughtWorks in 2010, I think, described as a message bus without smarts. And Sam Newman, in his recent microservices book, he called it smart endpoints, dumb pipes. So the service bus in this case would be the pipes, the dumb pipes. So the point is that it's a kind of a piece of infrastructure that doesn't try to solve all of your problems, but then it just solves some well-defined problems in a good way. And then if you want to integrate with some particular system or something like that, then that's the smarts that you have to implement. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I'm seeing it more of a framework that allows you to implement some things. It will do the sort of transportation of messages around, but it won't do any translation of those messages. You're literally saying, take this message and take it over there. And then it will come back and say, yeah, I delivered that. And then, okay, now take this message and deliver it over there. It's almost like a, what's the analogy? I guess kind of like the postal system. Like the person who delivers the mail doesn't need to figure out how to use your door. It doesn't need to figure out how to sort of read the letter to you. They are given a letter, They drive to your house.
Yeah.
They give you the letter, and then they drive back to their sort of post office.
Exactly. That's a really good analogy. I'm probably going to steal that.
Please do.
And then the fact that you have a mailbox. I mean, you have this interface that is like the mail system and the mailman and the mailbox. That's kind of the infrastructure. But then what happens behind the mailbox? That's all the smarts. That is still up to you. So another way I can explain what it does is I can go back to one of the first like really frustrating problems that I experienced as a professional software developer. I was a developer on a mortgage deed administration system, and one of the things that we needed to do in this system was to handle a web request, and then inside the handling of this web request, we had to update a fairly complex domain model in a database. We used Hibernate for that, and then send generate some prints and send them to the printer. And the only way we knew to do that would be to like open a database transaction and do all of the stuff that we needed to do in the database, and then send off all of this stuff to the printer, generate the documents using Office interop inside the web request, which is all kinds of unmanaged stuff with memory leaks and everything that we would do inside the web request, inside the database transaction, and then commit the transaction. And this would sometimes fail, and it would end up in we didn't know any better way to solve this problem, which is actually, it can be considered a situation where we have two transactions. In this case, one transaction would be a database transaction, and the other one would some kind of, using this Office interop library and sending stuff to the printer. Mm-hmm. We didn't know how to have two transactions and have them like complete and be committed at the same time, or not be committed at all. So we couldn't have like a unit of work that would reliably span all of this work. A better way to solve this problem would be to use some kind of messaging, and then inside this web request, we would send two messages. We could send like a message that would perform the modifications in the domain model in the database, and then we could send a message that would generate the prints and send it to the printer. And then these could fail or be completed individually instead of trying to do all of this stuff at the same time.
Sure, yeah. So let's say you sent a message through that old system, through the previous system. The database transaction for creating the documents, creating the print job fails. You can't be sure that it ever gets to, it will never get to the printer, and it may leave a transaction open.
Yeah.
And then you said another transaction, because the first one is still open, you can't access potentially the same tables. You might be able to generate the documents, but you can't send it to print because there's no way to write to the table to say, hey, this job has been done.
Yeah.
So that's what service buses are. So is there anything specific about Rebus and its implementation of a service bus? Like, I don't want to make it sound like this, but what's so great about Rebus, and what's, how's it different to other service bus implementations?
I think it's different because my initial starting point was that I used in Service Bus, and I was really happy about it in some ways, and in other ways I wasn't that happy about it. For example, in Service Bus didn't have that good error messages, so it would like just throw null reference exceptions sometimes when you try to start it up. I thought that was really frustrating. So one of the initial goals for Rebus was to have like really exceptional error messages. Like all of my error messages, I decided should follow this pattern of both explaining what was wrong, but also suggesting a path forward, so that experiencing an error with Rebus would not be a slap in the face. It would always be also a step forward in some way. An example of that is if you try to start Rebus up with, and you try to configure encryption, but you don't provide a valid encryption key, then it will automatically generate one for you and suggest, here, I generate this key for you, try and use that. Small stuff like that. So like being really pleasant to use. I guess that's how I think Rebus differs from the other service buses around.
That's fantastic. I always like when when I get something wrong or I get a compiler error or a runtime error. Like you say, it's a slap in the face.
Yeah.
Because you're maybe elbow deep in debugging knowledge, going, yes, I can get this, I can do this, I'm checking this, I'm running this test, and then all of a sudden, wham, it fails.
Yeah.
And you're left questioning yourself, you're left questioning your life choices. Oh, maybe that's just me, I don't know.
No, it's not just you.
But having the system be able to tell you, hey, this went wrong and here's why, and this is potentially what you can do to fix it, I feel like that would greatly speed up development time and make it a much better experience.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like more frameworks, tools, and languages and stuff like that should do things like that, because let's take a runtime error, null ref, a runtime error. What are you supposed to do with that?
Yeah, it's unforgivable.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think, just to be fair to In-Service Bus, I think they have made an effort in this particular area, and I think it's pretty much following the same pattern now, where they also suggest solutions to whatever problem it encounters. So they have probably improved a lot in that regard.
Probably by using Rebus.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that it's open source.
Yeah.
But you're making a business out of it. So I'm always interested to find out how different open source companies, what their business model is. We recently had, so at the time of recording, it's not gone out yet. We recently interviewed someone who has an open source library that you can use in development for free, but you have to pay for a license if you want to use it in production. Is that how this works, or is it more the sort of the Linux distribution model where you can use it for free, but you have to pay for support? What am I looking at if I'm building a production system?
Much more like the second model you described.
Okay.
I like to think of Mongodb, which is a free database, a free document-oriented database that you can use, and you can pretty much use it for anything. Although I think they actually made a small change recently where you cannot set yourself up to be a commercial MongoDB hosting provider using MongoDB unless you pay them. But MongoDB is just a really, really good document-oriented database that has become better and better. Even the free version has had features added to it, and it's just become better over time. But then they have this company where if you want training, or if you want support agreement, or if you want additional monitoring tools, then you have to pay for it. So that's the model I'm trying to follow. Everything in Rebus and all of the integration libraries is MIT licensed and completely free to use. And the thing I want to make money of is then to sell support and some additional tooling in the form of what I call Fleet Manager. Fleet Manager is obviously, if you have many buses, then you have a fleet. Mm-hmm. So Fleet Manager is the tool that makes it easy to manage your fleet of buses. So that's the model. Everything in Rebus is free, but if you want the Fleet Manager and support, then you can subscribe to that.
So I guess if the error messages are that user-friendly,
yeah,
would I even need the support?
Yeah, it's a good question, and maybe I'm naive. I've always had this belief that I should just make Rebus as good as I could, mm-hmm. and then I don't know if maybe I am naive, but I just believe that if I make Rebus really, really good, then everything will end up in a way where I can make a business out of it. So I have this picture of my pipeline, which is I have to make Rebus really good, make many companies use Rebus, and then I will probably not hear from them for a couple of years because they will just build stuff using Rebus and have fun doing that. But then at some point, they will want to ask for some advice for some concrete problems that they have, or they need this tooling to monitor their at that point pretty large Rebus installation and see that what it's doing and help them manage failed messages and stuff like that. And then they come to me. So that's what I hope will happen.
Sure. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Having worked in development teams for very large businesses, I know that in some places you're not allowed to use a library unless it comes with some kind of support agreement.
Yeah.
So I think you're targeting the right end of the spectrum there, so that an individual developer like me who wants to try out a message bus and try out the different alternatives can try Rebus and build something with it.
Yeah.
But then when I take it to the client and say, look, we're going to invest in this, and we're going to build something with this technology. You don't need to know about it, but we're telling you so that if anything goes wrong, you can contact these particular people and they will help you out with, support requests and stuff like that. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
So do you have any examples of where I would use Rebus in a project? We talked a little earlier, we used the analogy of like a sort of a mailman, a post-delivery person who takes a letter or a package and puts it into your mailbox, and then you have to go to your mailbox and figure out what you're going to do with it. But, that's pretty good for analogies. But are there any real world systems that you know of that have used it, or any example systems you've built that have used it?
Yeah, I built a couple of things myself. The first two things that I heard of that Rebus was used for was actually before I even started using it for something myself, was to control a power plant, a little power plant that had these. I don't understand this domain completely, but I think they had these plans for how this power plant should produce its power, and then they used Rebus to coordinate that, and that was something with like communicating with some price prognosis, and so apparently they built this system that would use Rebus to coordinate that. And another thing was there was a company in Aarhus that used Rebus for automating some kind of payment flow in their system. They're probably both really good examples of backend stuff happening in systems that needs to be carried out in a reliable fashion. So I guess whenever you need some kind of asynchronous thing going on in a reliable fashion, possibly involving multiple steps, then reliable messaging using durable message queues is a really good solution.
So I guess then, we're on the .NET Core podcast. So this Rebus is .NET Core compatible? Is it .NET Standard? Is there a binary for core, for framework, for whatever, or is it just a standard library? How does that sort of work?
The Rebus core library is targeting .NET 4.5, .NET 4.6, and .NET Standard 2.0. And the reason it targets both .NET 4.5 and .NET 4.6 is because some people are still using .NET 4.5, but .NET 4.5 does not have async local. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So it uses a logical data slot on the thread to store some thread static-like things. But yeah, so I guess it's available on all relevant .NET platforms.
Okay, so I could create a Xamarin app or a Unity game that uses Rebus to do some stuff, I guess.
Yeah, you could do that. But I guess if you build something with Xamarin or Unity, it would probably be more like a front-end kind of thing you would be building, wouldn't it?
Sure. Yeah, I guess, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And that's actually one thing that I sometimes hear of people that want to use Rebus as a sort of like in a situation where you would otherwise have used HTTP, for example, to have like many clients that contact some kind of backend. So, for example, if you have a Windows Forms app that needs to communicate with a server somewhere, I would not suggest that you use Rebus for that. I would suggest that you use a synchronous remote procedure-like protocol, for example, implemented using HTTP.
Sure, that makes sense. You don't want your form sitting around waiting for Rebus to be able to handle the message and then send the response back.
No, and also it's not asynchronous, like truly asynchronous communication is not that well suited for a situation where you have a front end that actually needs a reply as fast as possible. And also, if the Windows Forms app dies in the middle of after having sent a request and not having received a reply, then the reply has no value.
That's true, yeah.
It doesn't make sense to deliver a reply when the application, or probably doesn't make sense when the application starts up and it gets a reply to a request that it sent before it died. Because that's how message queues work. And yeah, so in that way, Rebus it's not a really good client-server communication library. It's more meant as a sort of a server-server communication library.
Sure, okay. The way I'm thinking about it is it's more for, we talked about it earlier, I guess. It's more for transactions of data rather than send a request, get a response. I want to tell another service to go do something.
Yeah.
And then when it has finished, it will tell me that it has done something. So like, I use the word transactions, but I know that at least in the UK, the majority of non-business banking transactions, so you go to the ATM, you take some money out, that doesn't actually leave your account until the overnight period, so like midnight. One bank will send a massive transaction or a series of transactions to another bank to update all of their records. So let's say you bank with Foo Bank Limited and I bank with Bar Bank Limited, two completely different companies, but I send you some money. I know that transaction will go through overnight. So maybe Rebus or a service bus-like system would be better for sending that transaction over because you need to get a response. And I suppose it doesn't really matter when that response comes through.
Yeah.
Whereas if the ATMs were connected with a Rebus, I would have to put my PIN in, push the button to take some money out. I'd have to wait for the message to go to the service bus, go to Rebus, and sit there waiting for Rebus to be able to process it.
Yeah.
Rebus then goes, brilliant, I've cleared my queue, here's this message, send it over to the bank and I will wait. And then the message comes back, it goes on to maybe a return queue or something, and then it has to sit and wait for a time slot to be able to send back to the ATM. And then eventually I get my money, but that may take minutes. Whereas an ATM, you push the buttons, you type some numbers in, you get some money out, and the money comes out instantly, as long as you have, a positive balance. The money comes out instantly, and then eventually that transaction is sort of like, is it eventual consistency? That transaction is eventually written back to the database.
Yeah.
Whereas, I guess, you wouldn't want that for like you were saying, like a real-time operation, an ATM or a Windows Form app, or maybe an app on your phone or something. You don't want to sit and wait for potentially minutes for that transaction to go through.
Yeah, exactly. So in all, many systems have this requirement. I mean, whenever you have a requirement that can be formulated, like whenever this happens, then this should also happen. Like when I process an order, then I also want an email to be sent, and I want some item to be allocated from the inventory, or whenever this happens, then this should also happen. That would probably be a situation where you could use messaging and decouple the steps of the entire workflow, the entire process that is going to be carried out here, and then process these steps as individual transactions where a message represents whatever is going to happen in that transaction.
So a lot of the talks that I've been to recently regarding service buses and service bus architecture and message buses, they've been specifically about microservices. So do I need to have a microservices architecture to be able to make use of Rebus, or can I have a monolith that sends a message that is wrapped in a generic format to Rebus? Rebus then forwards that to another monolith. The monolith does whatever it needs to do with that message and then sends a response back. Or do I literally need to split my system out into hundreds of different microservices in order to talk to Rebus?
You do not need to split your system into 100 tiny bits to use Rebus. In fact, I advise you to not do that. A problem I often see people solve using Rebus as sort of the first problem they solve using a message bus is whenever they need to send an email from their application. That's a really simple scenario where an application just wants to send an email in a reliable fashion, but communicating with an SMTP server from a web request handler can be kind of icky. And I know you can then maybe have an IIS with an email pickup directory or something like that to make it more reliable, but maybe you want to send your emails using SendGrid or whatever. And then people would just introduce a small Windows service that would have a Rebus instance inside it and would start up and have an input queue. And they could call this their mail service or something like that. And then whenever they want to send an email, they just send a message to the mail service. And then that one will take care of actually sending the email. So if, for example, they're using Exchange, their local Exchange server to send the emails, and the Exchange server is down because sometimes it's down, then it will actually, because they're using Rebus, it will try 5 times by default to send this email. And then if it still fails, it will move the message to the dead letter queue. By default, Rebus will create a queue called error, to which it will move messages that cannot be processed. So that way, if the sending of the email keeps failing, it will move the message to the error queue, and the information will not be lost in any way. And the message can be moved back later on when they have solved the problems with their Exchange server. So that's a really nice and simple scenario that yields a clear improvement of the reliability of their system.
So I'm thinking, if I take that example a little bit further and make it slightly more concrete. So let's say I have an ASP.NET Core system. I have a website or a service that you can sign up for that has authentication on there. And I require you to verify your email address. And as part of the sign up process, you put in all of your details, and then the system will send you an email with a link that you have to click to verify your email address.
Yeah.
I don't want my HTTP controller to be sitting, spinning, waiting for a confirmation message from the email service that I'm using to say, yes, that email has been sent to I want my data is validated, and then a message is sent to a message queue or a message bus, some kind of messaging system that will say, forward this detail, this email message onto the email provider, who will do whatever they need to do with it. And then eventually that email will be delivered to the customer, to the client, to whoever it is that was signing up, because I want to be able to display that you should receive an email message instantly versus sitting and waiting for anything between my app and the email system. The email server could hold that message up. So I want to be able to display to the user as quickly as possible. Check your emails in the next couple of minutes. You receive a message that says, click this link. So I want to display that as quickly as possible without having to wait for the email service to tell me that it has been sent, because presumably they may have a message bus at their end for sending the messages out, because you can't send 5,000 messages all at once because SMTP servers don't like that.
Yeah, that's a good example.
It's a bit of a rambly example, but I think you got the point.
Yeah.
So where can people go to learn more about Rebus then? Is there a website? Is there a forum? Is it a YouTube channel? What do we do if we want to learn more about Rebus?
A good starting point would be to look up the project on GitHub. I have created an organization, a GitHub organization for all of the open source Rebus bits and some more stuff that may or may not be relevant to people building systems using Rebus. And the Rebus core project has a wiki on it that documents a lot of stuff about Rebus. Yeah, so that's a good starting point. Another way would be to sign up to the mailing list. I have a weekly Rebus tips mailing list. There's a link on my rebus.fm. It's my company website, but it's not commercial tips in any way. It's basically just little weekly nuggets with tips on how Rebus can be used and different extensibility mechanisms can be put to use and stuff like that. So that's also a good way. And then I'm actually a little bit unsure if I should mention this because I'm not writing as quickly as I really wanted to, but I'm actually in the process right now of writing a book, the little messaging book. But things are not going as quickly as I as I really wish they were. But at some point, there will be a book which I will publish for free. It will be on the littlemessagingbook.net. I already purchased the website. So I guess also that would be a good way to learn Rebus. But unfortunately, I haven't published anything yet.
So there's a bit of a queue, shall we say, of podcast episodes before this one. So it will be, 2 or 3 months, I guess, before this one comes out. I actually produce 2 podcasts, 2 separate, completely unrelated shows. So being able to edit 2 completely different shows, and one of them we record 3.5 hours of audio each time. So that takes a while to get through.
Yeah, I can imagine. Wow.
So we talked about the website. Is there a lot of documentation on examples? So like if I want to implement Rebus in a .NET stack that I have, can I go to the website and read up how to do that? Or is that something that I kind of have to figure out by myself?
On the wiki, I have a couple of scenarios where I kind of describe like some typical business scenarios that I have encountered, and then you can see how they can be solved using Rebus. I think the scenarios are, I can't remember exactly what the 2 first are about. I think one of them is about how to decouple, how to use publish subscribe in Rebus, basically. So the scenario is you have an application and it wants to provide information to the world about the work that it is doing. And a good way to do that would be to use publish subscribe with Rebus. So whenever this thing does something, it will then publish a message saying, I did this. That would enable whoever might be interested in hearing about that to subscribe to the relevant events. So that would be one scenario. I have another scenario that is pretty interesting, and that is a scenario that is using Rebus's process manager implementation. Rebus is an implementation of some officially described messaging patterns. And one of these patterns is the process manager. You can think of it as a state machine that is running on whose transitions are defined by messages. And you can have multiple instances of the state machine. So the state machine can implement some kind of messaging workflow of some kind. And the scenario I describe here is, I think, is that I have a trade that happens in a trading system. And then whenever I get a new trade, I need to have this trade approved, both by a legal department and by a credit assessment department, before I do something to it. I don't know if I remember this completely correct, but the point is that there is an example that describes how Rebus can be used to solve that problem of having individual flows for each trade, and then carrying out some asynchronous processes with multiple systems, and then have that handled that way. And that's on the wiki. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so that's all documented, and so if somebody wants to go away and learn how to use Rebus, they can go and check out the wiki and this is how I would implement this, and then they can get some ideas of how to implement it in their own system.
Yeah, and then there is also a Rebus Samples repository on GitHub with just plain code examples that shows different things. It's called Rebus Samples.
Brilliant. Okay, so what if I, in the unlikely event, if I'm using Rebus and I spot something that's a bug or have an issue with it, if I raise that on GitHub, is that a good way to get in contact with you to say, hey, this is something that I've spotted that's not brilliant in my use case?
Yeah. Raise an issue on GitHub, or if you have a question, you can ask it on GitHub or on Stack Overflow. And if you tag it appropriately on Stack Overflow, then I will notice and I will probably answer your question.
Okay.
Or someone else will. Yeah.
So let's say I find a bug and I go, I can fix this, and I submit a pull request. Do you accept pull requests as well?
Yeah, I love pull requests. I mean, I should also mention this. I mean, Rebus consists of a core project and I think 30 or 40 or maybe 50 projects in addition to that. So Rebus is much bigger than I would have been able to make it myself.
Sure.
So the only way it can become that big is by accepting contributions from people. So in addition to me, I think almost 100 people have contributed to Rebus. So it is like much bigger than I would have been able to make it.
Wow.
So yeah, pull requests are most welcome.
That's a lot of people working on this. I like that. Where can the listeners go to learn more about yourself then? So we've talked about Rebus. Can folks, do you run a blog? Can folks reach out to you over Twitter? That kind of thing. Is there a way for folks to connect with you? Is that something you are interested in? You allow?
Yeah, sure. My Twitter handle is Mookid8000. Mookid is from an Aphex Twin song.
Okay.
I used to listen to electronic music a lot.
Sure.
But yeah, my handle is Mookid8000 pretty much anywhere. So on GitHub and on Twitter, that's where I can be found. And yeah, if people have something to say, then please get in touch.
Fantastic. Well, that's all the questions I have for you today, all the topics that I wanted to cover, I guess. The only thing left for me to do, I guess, is to thank you ever so much for being on the podcast. Mogens, I appreciate that you're a busy person. We're all pretty busy these days, but, taking the time out, because we're in separate time zones as well. So taking the time out during what is your, I guess, coming up to mid-morning and my early morning, I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a really nice experience to be in your podcast.
Thank you ever so much. We'll see if we can get as many listeners as possible to check out Rebus and maybe to do some Google binging for your brewing company, and maybe we can get loads of orders in. I don't know.
yeah, that would be cool.
Like I say, thank you ever so much for being on the podcast, Mogens. It's been a wonderful experience talking with you today about Rebus.
Yeah, thanks.
That was my interview with Mogens about Rebus. Be sure to check the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice, and to come back next time for some more .NET Core goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.